Hello and welcome to day 3. And I hope you are enjoying your intuitive art journaling journey so far. Today, we are going to explore the language of simple marks, patterns, and this is to create your own distinctive collage papers, along with the mark making papers and the pattern papers. As you can see, we're going to use simple tools. So just use brushes. If you don't have a brayer, don't worry about it. You can also use wedges. This is the Catalyst wedge. You can use color shapers. You can use spatulas from your kitchen and whatever mark making tools and brushes you might have, along with found objects that you have already explored, making your patterns from day 2. Just some simple stencils. This is a Stencil Girl stencil, organic dots. If you don't have a stencil, that's okay. I'm going to show you other ways to get your marks, but any kind of stencil that you like, even numbers, letters will work. My other favorite one, and these hexagons or bee kind of hive, and a longer corrugated cardboard, and of course bubble wrap. And I've chosen these for the mark making because besides the stencils that I just showed you, most people would have them on hand. So these are going to make some big circle marks and smaller ones. I also have a Lego block, which I've used a lot. This lid I love because it comes with a handle. I don't even know where this came from. And of course, the Dixie cups. Well, the first method of how I multi-layer my collage papers is what I call gestural collage. And it is the most freeing of the process because you're using your line work, you're using stamping tools, any patterns that you really learn to love in day 2 and more. You get to really combine all of the elements together, and I really explore and play with this process. I use a lot of black, but then I like to add areas of color depending on the palette that I'm using at the time. And of course, using my favorite stencils, and you can use the hexagons would have looked good here. I'm only putting it in a certain area, but I'm using overlapping and repetition and keeping the colors, yes, black and white, and then I'm going to come in with some blues, maybe grays. Also going to monoprint here from my palette, as you can see. So it's just anything goes with this kind of collage paper making. Really playing with some more of that line work, making sure that that paint is dry, of course, or your markers will get ruined. So I think I did save that with some alcohol on the tip. I love the combination of orange and pink. Those are my favorite colors. You have your own. Also adding pastel in whatever dash line or broken line or circles, any repeated pattern that you like. You can do it all over, of course. You can overlap into another area. Using your finger. I use my finger quite a bit. And then I layer on top with putting some white in if I feel it's too strong. Coming in with the scratchy brush and just putting that scratchy circle right there. You can also multi-layer over previous patterns. And this is adding a wash. So I think I know why I did this, because it was too high contrast and it just needed some calming down. So I'm using a cool blue here, adding a little turquoise, the aqua, and then I let it dry, and I'm even adding another layer of my large circles using my leftover tape dispenser. Finishing up with some white sprinkles instead of black, and I just like that for a texture. Here is some newsprint paper, which I have previously rolled from leftover paint from my palette with my brayer. Let it dry, of course. And now, why it's so interesting is it's a stronger hue of the blue that's under there, and with those black expressive lines. Yes, made with my brayer. Just rolling it on my palette and just rolling it on the paper. I've discovered lately that adding water, especially to newsprint paper, really softens up and changes the feeling of those marks. Going further with my small brayer and changing the shapes. So here I have used a brayer again, or a color shaper. If you don't have a brayer, you can use any kind of spreading tool. This is raw umber, and of course, if you notice, that kind of lid, which you can buy in packages, is great. But if you don't cover it up with something, maybe some sticky tack just to plug the hole, it clogs up easily. So I used a pin and got it unplugged, and now I'm loving those raw umber lines. Some more line work. I just used my small brayer there, but I didn't like the stripes, so I want to fill in the negative space on the newsprint using a color shaper. It's a different blue and I don't mind, and I'm keeping that layer very translucent. So, taking it further, so using some black, I choose to use a more monotone and simple palette so my papers can be all cohesive. And I'm really not into the super bright colors, especially on a blue collage, but in the future, who knows? And also trying some white dashes, maybe some neutral dashes, maybe some yellow ochre dashes on some really lovely backgrounds, so you have a subtle contrast rather than a high contrast. And of course, spraying with paper, scoring through with my awl to add some energy is also a great idea. And so as you can see, the placement of your circles really influences the feel and the energy. So these are fairly tight and they're in order. So you could experiment with all over and different spacing. And of course, this layer needs to dry thoroughly before putting any color on. You can use black, even a neutral. You can have a subtle value. So you have a low contrast, high contrast. And I'll leave some examples here for you to see. That turned out so nice. Larger circles, sort of alternating order here. And then I decided, well, let's try some blue, but a neutral, any kind of, just as well as we're keeping the colors simple and adding a thin layer. And so go and experiment with different marks. They don't necessarily need to be circles, and you'll be amazed at what you can get. So I'm applying the paint with the brayer here, and without a jelly plate printer, so you don't need a jelly plate printer to get this effect. And I love that I can go right to the edge, so I don't waste paper with this technique. And adding a little white, letting the surprises of the shapes that the brayer creates. And then I'm going to add some pattern. So what's inspiring me this time, the black would look really cool. So I'm going to do, I think I'm going to go smaller. And it's just a matter of stamping. And I like to crop a row. So, multiple layers on old book pages is another collage that I absolutely love. Um, Using text because it ages in such different types of neutrals. So I'm using the color shaper to apply it because I didn't want it a solid. I wanted it just to be spontaneous. And I'm adding, as you can see, before I go with the neutral, a little bit of spray. So I've discovered this lately because it just makes those marks soft. And then you can add a little more. And depending on what paper you're using, if it can handle a lot of water or not. So I thought, well, let's keep going with this with my circles. And as you can see, the paint on my palette is drying up a little bit. So that's why these are so imperfect, and they're just great. I love them. Remember, there's no mistakes. Just let your intuition and be free. So, and here is my dashes. It's a slightly different blue, but as you can see, this is newsprint paper that I've just monoprinted with probably leftover paint, very dry paint on my palette. And now I'm adding a second and a third layer of different blues. This is the turquoise mixed with a little bit of the light blue, which makes a beautiful blue. And I'm wanting them to be different. So it just gets that motion of the eye through it. And I love how newsprint can resemble old text or vintage papers. And this is very similar. You could probably and may have practiced this already in day 2, but now we're multi-layering what we like, what we resonate with. And this is one of my favorite marks. So now I'm demonstrating how you multi-layer with stencils. And at the end of this demonstration, I show you which 3 stencils I use and the order, and it can create a really cool effect just using 3. I started off with yellow oxide, and it's a little too strong. I like it a little more subtle, so I added some of that parchment, and which is more opaque. So this is another thing that you'll get used to, exploring the opacity and the transparency of your paints. So that's the last one. The first one, of course, is the 3 different areas of small geometric shapes. And I'm using that interesting old encyclopedia page. So that's really cool. So it's the ghost print that I'm after. And I really like the ghost prints more than the first prints. And this paper is amazing as to lifting those layers off the jelly plate. So we'll leave that to the side. And then my next layer, it could be any dark, maybe a Payne's gray, maybe even a raw umber, but just for demonstration purposes. And I did want to be able to replicate that page, which I show you. I'm using Mars Black. And then the circles. So I'm lifting that off, making the first print on something else, which then becomes more collage paper. And believe me, you can build up your collage papers very quickly. So you might want to keep a handle on that. So I'm lifting the ghost print with that yellow oxide page. It's grabbing it nicely. And I'm liking, so now it's, yes, it's a little stronger underneath, which you might like, and I don't mind. So now we're going to lift that off. As you can see on a paper towel, I'm taking the black off my brayer. And this is going for the last. And I know there was a little bit of black in that parchment. And this is where the hexagon stencil will go on. Put that page back on for its third layer. And then we've got something interesting. And this is just one combination, so it looks very similar, so I'm very pleased with it. Here are the stencils. You can get these art stores, Amazon. Here's the two side by side. And here's that one on the far left that inspired it all. And I'm going to show you how you can use at least 2 or 3 different types of stencils and just explore any of those with some warm yellow oxide here and the turquoise. And so I'm adding the last lighter layer using the transparent white by Liquitex to the turquoise where I added the that neutral, and it really created a beautiful patina. And that's going to end up with a very subtle pattern. And you might want to make a bunch of these too. And this is why we only use 1 or 2 colors, because in the end, you can do so much with just those colors, and you get such a lovely variety of cohesive collage papers that work well together. So we all have our own unique marks, and by exploring pattern play and seeing what works well, then you're going to pick your favorites for day 5, but there's one more day, day 4, where I'm going to briefly show you how to have a good selection of transparent papers.